Okay, here's the tool I made. This happened to have been a shaft on a big electric motor water pump, but I guess you can make it out of anything. Start with buy a piece of threaded rod. There's several different ways to do it. You need a lathe. On the back side I drill a hole so it will center on the stud so it doesn't slip off. And then on this end, I made this thing, same thing, got a little depression there so it catches, and it slides over the threads. And then as you back off this nut, it expands and pushes on both upper and lower ball joints. One advantage of this unit is it doesn't mess up the rubber boot if you happen to be replacing something other than the ball joints. Okay, here's the tool in place between the two nuts on both sides of the ball joints, and I hold this with one wrench, I tighten this with the other wrench, it expands and pushes and breaks those ball joints loose. I tried a pickle bar, didn't work worth a darn. I tried using the hammer. They talk about smacking them with a hammer right there when it didn't work. So I made this tool. Okay, that heard a loud pop when I tightened it real tight. Now this is loose because this went up. And I didn't take the nuts all the way off, I just loosened them. And now you can see that's pretty tight. So then I'll adjust this higher to put more pressure on the bottom one. And if it doesn't pop from just the pressure of this thing, then I'll start smacking it with a hammer down here. Okay, I've got it under tension again. As you can see, these are still loose, so I'm going to hit this with the air hammer and see if it makes any difference. Okay, the air hammer didn't do it, but the big hammer did. You can see this is now tight here. So then I'll back off this and take this out. Okay, the reason you leave the nut on, first off, you take the shock out of here because if the shock is hanging in there, then there's no downward force on this lower arm. So you take the shock out so it's not hanging by the shock. But then the reason you leave this nut on is if you break that loose without the nut, it'll come flying out. The lower arm will fly down and this spring will come flying out at you. So you leave the nut on, and then you put a jack underneath here and jack it up to hold it. Then you take these nuts off and take these apart and then slowly lower that down to get the spring out. And as a safety measure, you can tie the spring up from here to here with some twine or heavy rope, and then lower it down. That way if the spring wants to jump out, it can't go very far.